Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 5 in our series on the art of game design by Jesse Schell.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Man, I feel like I need to commit this sequence to memory. We just need to do the same exact thing every time because we always step on each other's toes.
Yeah, we are terrible at starting the podcast. We should, what we should do is that thing that a lot of podcasts do where they'll be talking and then they'll just start recording. And it's like the podcast literally starts in the middle of some conversation.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't do an intro at all.
Yeah, just dive right in.
One of my favorite podcasts, Hello Internet, there was never a wrap up. They would literally just finish a sentence and then the podcast would be over. And wouldn't even know that it had stopped.
It's what was that book?
It's a power move.
Rules of Attraction, I think, where it the book started in the middle of a sentence and then ended in the middle of a sentence. It was Bret Easton Ellis book. It's kind of cool.
I like it.
Anyhow, today we were going to brainstorm, right? Brainstorm our awesome idea.
The plan is to brainstorm, and if you've been listening along, maybe confused, right? It's like we already had an idea, but it's garbage. And the point is to generate as many ideas as possible because we basically generated one idea.
Yeah, we came up with the idea before Mr. Schell taught us how to brainstorm.
How to come up with ideas. And we realized we had done everything wrong.
Exactly. So now it's just back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board.
Mr. Schell cracking the whip.
We'll keep that idea in our pocket. Maybe it's the best idea. We just want to generate more because there's probably an even more good idea. So just as a note about the way we're doing this, we're not going to run through all of the brainstorming tips and do them one by one because some of them are just kind of general suggestions about something to do while you're brainstorming. But there was one in particular that we thought was a good structure. So you kind of go through the categories of elements, technology, mechanics, story ideas, and aesthetic ideas, kind of one at a time. And you kind of just think about solutions to that particular domain in a vacuum. And then, we'll see if we can, mix and match and see which, and that was brainstorming idea number 14, if you're following along in the book.
Yes. And, some of the other ones were also kind of visual, which is difficult to do on a podcast. So Matt and I might do those offline, or you and I might do those offline, which will be really fun, like playing with toys, for instance.
Yes.
But this one I felt made the most sense for doing over a podcast.
Maybe we should start with what experience are we attempting to create for our users? Yeah,
that was something I was liking our initial ideas. I feel like our initial ideas were you're building a society or you're building a civilization, which I just think is an interesting theme. And you're dealing with godlike entities. You're either controlling the godlike entities or maybe they're out of your control and they're doing stuff to you. The game is collaborative. Every player of the game is kind of against the game itself, kind of like Pandemic. I like all of those initial concepts. We talked a little bit about a game board and, I don't know, we might totally throw that away today, but that was something that had come up. But yeah, I like some of those things. I like the whole building a civilization theme and the godlike entities thing.
I think we have some mechanics in here. We have some technology. We have some aesthetics here. So I think the collaboration is the one that feels like it's the most essential experience. It's okay, the experience of this thing, and I'm not saying we're jettisoning the rest of those ideas because I like the rest of them, but it's and I also think the experience of commanding godlike powers is also, it's basically elemental forces,
right?
Where they have the ability to have a tremendous impact, and it could be positive, it could be negative, and it's your job to like redirect those elemental forces in such a way that they benefit you.
I like the concept of like vague influence where,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't know, like this is just a random concept, but I feel like we talked about it before where you can't like directly control gods, but you can do certain things kind of indirectly. Like you can, you know, pray at a church or something and maybe build up prayer powers in order to eventually influence a god. Or you might influence a god, but it like takes a long time for it to happen, or maybe it happens at like a random point in time later or something. So it's kind of this weird, you know, not direct control, but sort of a vague indirect influence.
All right. Well, before we get too deep into the weeds, just rehashing the idea we had before, let's start to follow the outline that we laid earlier, the first topic of which is technology.
Yes. Which for us, I think is a very interesting topic because we have some experience in this stuff.
It would be, you know, I think it would be on brand of us to build a video game, and particularly a Flutter app.
Yes.
So, and that's another interesting question. It's like, is this a mobile game?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the beauty of Flutter. It could be a web game. Because I think something that's going to be important for us, and you know, if our listeners are interested in this, is that they can just play it, and they can play the game with very low. You know, I don't want people to have to like download an app on their phone or whatever. So I feel like ideally we'd be able to publish like a web version or something.
Okay. That's the kind of the simple thing. We've talked about a board game. And I like that idea because it's different.
I love the board game idea, but I also think we could like kind of make a board game with Flutter.
Do both. Yeah.
And you know, like I've always wondered, like, how do you make a board game? Like, what's a good way to, you know, do you like literally cut out things from cardboard and like experiment with that? Or I feel like our skill set is building technology. So I feel like even if you and I were to set out to make a board game, like we'd probably build some technical demos.
I think Tabletop Simulator, I think that would be the best way to do it, frankly, because we could just create these 3D. Literally, we could just create images.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm teasing a next chapter. He talks about having doing prototypes and throwaway prototypes. And what I like about doing it in Tabletop Simulator is we can, I think in a relatively low effort way, come up with a game that like we can say, okay, these are the pieces, these are the elements, and like, we don't have to build a whole game in order to test if like these interactions with these elements work.
I mean, that sounds awesome. I don't know that much about Tabletop Simulator, but can you like do mechanics and stuff?
Well, this is the thing. Like, I think you wouldn't like. There are some mechanics that you can do. They do have some things about like working with a deck. You can easily shuffle a deck of cards, or you can. They're not going to necessarily enforce the rules. Like you can literally flip the table in Tabletop Simulator. So it's basically like a physics simulator with some light. You know, they have die. You can roll a die.
Right.
So like, I think I'm not saying that would be the final thing. I'm saying what it would allow us to do is to prototype a board game.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, I love that idea because it gives us so much for free. But I do wonder if we will have specific enough mechanics that we'll eventually have to like move away from that and build, you know, like a Flutter version or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it would look like is we come up with the mechanics and presumably it'll be annoying at first to try to like manage all the mechanics to be like, okay, you have to add these many points to this thing. I guess what we need to decide is like, do we want to make a board game that has a Flutter implementation, or do we just want to make a Flutter game? Because those are two totally different things, I feel like.
Yeah, that's... my original conception of this, which I'm totally fine with changing, was that it was a board game. Mm-hmm. But I was actually thinking that the way we would go about this, in order to get to the widest audience, or actually not to get to the widest audience, but just to allow people to like play with it easily, is that we would make a web game. And obviously that's super complicated. We'd have to do like, especially if it was multiplayer, we have to do some kind of like network protocol stuff. But yeah, that's what I was originally thinking. But if we can get a lot of mileage out of Tabletop Simulator, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing, I really like the idea that we could actually make this game. And I guess my concern about going too quickly to Flutter is that we come up with mechanics that actually can't work as a board game. Where I think Tabletop Simulator, if we have mechanics that are annoying to do in Tabletop Simulator, I think we'll get a sense for if they would be annoying to maintain in real life too. Yeah. Like, for example, I think Eye of Judgment, which we've talked about before, it's a playing card game, but it's like backed by the PS3. It's hard to play that game in real life because there's a ton of these very fiddly rules that like there's not a good way to keep track of in real life.
Yeah.
And the game doesn't intend for you to do it in real life. So, right. So I guess that would be my one concern.
That's a super valid concern. So, and I think that's another advantage to doing it doing the initial kind of prototyping in Tabletop Simulator, because I think it will be a good way to learn what mechanics are annoying.
Let's think outside the box, though. Maybe this could be a text-based game. Like, what would this look like as a console game?
Console game? You're saying as a text-based console game, or?
I'm spitballing here. Like, I want us to like think outside the box a little bit.
Yeah. What would it look like as a text-based game? I do think. I mean, a text-based collaborative game would be so interesting, because
that's something that I feel like I've never even heard.
Never heard of that.
Collaborative terminal game.
Yeah, because it's crazy, because you can do I think something that's interesting in collaborative games, or games that require a lot of like interaction with other players, is you can do interesting things with like information hiding, just having certain players be privy to certain things. And I feel like in a text-based game, that's like, super easy to do. Like, you're literally just conveying text information to each player. So yeah, I think that would be very interesting. It's obviously harder to do things like seeing the whole game board at a glance, being able to kind of show multiple things happening at once. So there's definitely a limiting, way of doing things, but maybe that's good. Like, I love the idea of restricting ourselves.
Actually, this reminds me of a game that's from one of the more famous like Flutter developers, one of the developers on Flutter. But it would be like you make a move and then it generates some text, like a nice text as a result. Like, it's like, you open up on the verdant fields of something forest. Like, you don't see anything like around, and you pick a clearing to make your encampment, and like, it would almost be like a modern choose your own adventure.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like this is very interesting, because you could just do so much with like player interaction, where maybe some things have like text fields that players are like entering into, and then another player can see what a player entered and do some sort of action based on that.
I would love if it like, oh my gosh, like maybe like a real-time game where it's like every like you're constantly getting new paragraphs and maybe would be stressful, but it's like, and maybe it's just things that are happening in the world, like, and if one of your collaborators does something, and they have a name, it's like Lord Snarth decides to engage in a new like building, whatever. Yeah. Like, and I don't know, it just comes up with some like, I don't know, we use GPT-3 or something and try to generate this like cool sounding text.
I mean, this feels like it could wind up being a huge pivot from some of the original ideas, but I kind of love it. Like pure text based, very collaborative somehow. I don't know how the collaboration would work, but you're like seeing text written by other players. You're seeing text that might be generated, by the game itself.
Are there any other big...
I mean, technology, yeah, we could do kind of like we haven't talked about Unity, for instance, which we have some Unity experience. We could do, like you wrote down VR game. I don't know if we actually chatted about that, but we could do like a Unity VR game. Like we have experience in that, so we could try to do something simple.
Would you be like boots on the ground? Would you have this kind of high level overworld view?
I like the idea of the high level overworld view. One of the things that is interesting to me about this game is that like godlike point of view where, I see gods as these entities that are kind of apathetic. And I think it'd be cool to put the player into those shoes where you're observing the civilization, you're like trying to make it work, but crazy things happen. And, maybe like tons of people die because like the water god sent a tsunami or something. And that's just kind of part of everyday operations for you because you're this like apathetic godlike entity. So if we were to do a VR game, I think I'd want to have that overworld view.
I'm just trying to think about the point of view of a god. Like, why do they even care about prayers? And is it like, is there some higher god that is like being like, hey, like, dude, you got like, Jill has prayed to you 700 times. Like, you got to throw her a bone. Like, yeah. And there, who are the gods manager? And like, why are they listening to prayers at all?
Yeah, that is fascinating. Because I do like the concept that the gods have no obligations and they don't necessarily care. And like what you were talking about earlier, where like, you might just start a game and a god doesn't like you and you're not going to be able to get him to do anything no matter how much you pray. But maybe I don't know, maybe it's like a human, like animal relationship.
Yeah.
Where... No, if the animal
like ants
is cute enough, yeah, like ants, where you might drop a little bit of Coca-Cola by their hive, their colony.
So it's almost like entertainment. It's like amusement.
Yeah, maybe amusement, or maybe maybe some gods take it a little bit more seriously than others. Maybe it's like the gods are playing a game, and they They have as much commitment as you would imagine a human would have, like playing some game.
They're playing each other?
Yeah, maybe it's similar to like a bunch of humans sitting down and like playing a game of Monopoly, Some people take it seriously, some people are just kind of along for the ride.
Maybe gods just want the most. They're fighting each other over like having the most people who are praying to them, or...
Yes. Yeah, the gods are playing a game where the goal of the game is to maximize prayer.
And if you just destroy everything, like that's obviously not a good thing for prayer.
Unless some other god is really beating you, in which case you might want to, flip the table over.
So it's a kind of a zero-sum game with prayer, well, where one prayer for one god cannot be used for... Or like is like a negative for another god. Is that kind of how we're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
But this is from the point of view of the people on the ground, though. Is that what we're thinking?
This is the point of view from the people on the ground?
Like the people on the ground are the ones who like, yes, the gods are playing the game, but we're still trying to build a civilization. Or are we the gods who are trying to get the prayer?
That's a great question, and I feel like something we need to define early, because I've definitely thought about this where the player is not a god. The player is like like an alderman or something of the society.
Could you define what an alderman is?
Like a village elder or something, audience, just some kind of... I was trying to think of like a term that like an ancient tribe would use, like the tribal shaman or something.
Okay. Yeah. It seems like we are starting to get into mechanics a little bit, so maybe it makes sense for us to just formally dive in head first.
Yeah, gods that are trying to maximize prayer, maybe. With things like, a board, like, is that a mechanic? Like, this is a board game. We play on a board. We've talked before, like, maybe it consists of tiles.
I think a better word for technology is actually medium. And I think mechanics, again, I go back to what Jesse Schell has described before, where it's the skin versus the skeleton. And I feel like, and this isn't always the case, but I feel like generally we should be able to take any one of these mechanics and then implement them with any one of those technologies. Yeah. Like they should be kind of completely orthogonal. And I know other people don't think about it this way, and I know there are some cases where some mechanics just literally are not going to work in some of the mediums.
Yeah.
But so I view them as orthogonal. Like a board game is like there's some abstract concept that the board represents, which like we could stick into a video game, but
right. So maybe an example of a mechanic would be like tiles, because I think we talked before that the game might consist of like a grid of tiles.
Right. So the because the mechanic is this like tile-based movement.
Tile-based movement, and also as the gods are, doing their shenanigans, like the tiles are being manipulated in some way.
It sounds like prayer is.
Yeah, prayer I think is a mechanic. Maybe like building, things like, I don't know how the village functions, but I imagine, how do you build a prayer? Like I imagine you build a church and you like put people in it or something. And I don't know, maybe resource allocation.
One of the things that's interesting to me is like, again, I'm thinking back to this idea where like, what are the gods? The gods, they have a human-animal relationship, essentially.
Yeah.
And what do humans like about animals? They do funny things or like they do amusing things. So I almost think like throwing a festival or something, like building art.
Yes.
Those are other things that I think could, the gods are just like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, all right, boom. Like, I don't know. I'm going to do something.
Yeah, I love that.
And like, and maybe a festival in itself is good, but like, a festival celebrating a god is like, it's kind of like prayer, So what's interesting is maybe a festival, like maybe all gods are amused by a festival, but like you could get an extra benefit if it's like a festival in celebration of one of the gods, and then maybe that like upsets the other gods.
That could be a thing. Yeah, maybe a strategy is to like alienate a god. You might. I think that would be interesting if that could be a successful collaborative strategy to kind of like, oh, let's ignore the earth god, and maybe he'll cause an earthquake and kill a bunch of villagers. But if we please the water god enough, then we can grow some crops, something like that.
Can the gods interact with one another?
That's one thing. I mean, I think it'd be interesting if the gods could like synergize in some way. Like this is just a totally random example, but maybe there's a mountain tile and you want to convert it to a farmland tile. So you need to get the like earth god to turn it into a desert tile. And then you need to get the water god to like rain on it or something. And then it becomes like a farm tile. So, and I think those types of things where you're kind of like invoking multiple gods in order to like accomplish some goal could be really interesting. Because I think like I feel like a part of the gameplay could involve preventing the gods from doing certain things, or like protecting, shielding like a festival from like the storm god, or something along those lines, or shielding your church from like the storm god or the fire god from burning it down. But then another interesting element could be like strategically invoking gods to like accomplish certain goals.
So we've talked about prayer a little bit. Does a prayer invoke a god? Or is there always like a probability that a prayer invokes a god?
That's where I would want to not have tight control. Like, I think I think the prayer should manipulate the gods. Like, let's say, for instance, you want to move a god. Say he's like sitting on a tile and you're like, oh no, the fire god is on my church tile and the fire god is about to explode. So I want to move him off of the church tile. Then you might be able to pray to the fire god, but maybe he like moves to a random tile or something. So you might have two churches next to each other and he just like moves to the other tile with the church and then he explodes. And I don't know if that's a great example, but just something along those lines where you can manipulate the gods, but in ways that aren't fully controlled. You know, they might, like, maybe there's a random dice roll where you might be trying to move the fire god, but instead you cause a forest fire or something.
So you pray to a god and then they kind of have some domain of possible things that they do?
I mean, perhaps. I'm totally spitballing. But yeah, maybe you pray to a god. Maybe you can like build up prayer and then invoke gods based on like prayer points.
What do you think about this? Should there be a DM that controls the gods?
Oh.
I almost think it would be really useful to have a human-based agent. And I'm almost thinking of it in a D&D like way where it's like you say a prayer and like the dungeon master like assesses it's almost like a roll, like, oh, I try to like shoot that guy with an arrow. If you roll a 20, it's like you shoot him right in the eye and his brain explodes. So like, but if you roll a 1, it's like you accidentally shoot you're
hoisted
team.
by your own petard.
Well, right. And so I almost think like it feels like you would want to allow someone to like know, okay, like I can see how much I like you and like I know what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And depending on how much I like you, I'm going to do something that's either like neutral or something that helps or like that really fucks you over and like you don't even know, like you're not sure it, like, okay, like do they just not like me? Do they, and
yeah.
So it's kind of,
I think that's super interesting and I've never heard of a mechanic like that. And I do think because you could have limitations on that mechanic. Like basically each god could be in a state where the DM can do certain things.
Yes,
like the DM would only be able to, to go crazy if you had like never prayed to the lightning god or something. And so,
right.
Yeah. Cause I think it'd be important if we did give the DM, godlike powers. I think some limitations, could be important. I think it's also interesting to not say that the DM is actively trying to make the rest of the players lose. Like maybe the DM is just, you had said the term amoral earlier, which I thought was really interesting, where the DM isn't necessarily trying to make the players lose or win. The DM is just kind of like doing whatever she thinks at the time. But her actions are slightly restricted based on like things that the players can control.
I guess I'm not sure that we need to get to, and I think it would be the kind of thing where maybe we come up with some rules about how much the god's affinity for you governs what you can do.
Exactly.
But I think as a V1, like we might want to keep it open-ended just because it's going to be a function of what the player wants to happen. You know what I mean? And so like maybe for whatever reason, it's a good thing that like you burn down this whole big field or something. Like maybe there is some sort of war or like there's battles or something like that. Yeah. And so I almost think like we might need to do some cycles of like, okay, do we know what the domain of possible options should be if the affinity is 100 versus 0 or
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe we start, because I'm a big fan of that. Let's get something up and running and then kind of iterate on it. But yeah, I love that idea conceptually.
One downside to that is it does increase the number of people that you would need to play the game. Like now, presumably, you would need at least like 3 people to play the game.
Right.
which I don't know, just something to be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely alternatives, like these games like Pandemic or something. They'll typically have like a phase of the turn where the virus takes over, and you just like, there's a deck of virus cards or something that describe what the virus does. So, I think there's decent alternatives to this, but I do like the idea that some player has agency over this. Do you want to start talking about story ideas?
Yeah, let's talk about story.
So I feel like we've already touched on this a lot. I mean, like building a civilization.
I think the main question is like, do we want characters? Do the players take particular roles?
Yeah.
Because maybe there are, like, because we've talked about building, we've talked about praying. Maybe there's something else, like maybe each one of the roles has something that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, like Pandemic has a cool mechanic where each player is like, the medic or something, and the medic can like clear out disease cubes, and some players like the dispatcher, they can move everyone else around. So yeah, maybe I feel like that's a fun way to add a little bit more flavor. Like maybe there's a builder, or maybe there's like a pastor or a priest or whatever.
I like that, but I think I would want it, and this is almost more in the mechanics territory, but like you wouldn't need, none of these would be required. You could just pick.
They would just make certain things easier, maybe.
Yeah, it would be like, okay, which one of these benefits do you want? I guess the story is pretty straightforward, like what the story is. So maybe we don't need to spend that much more time, because like if we're going through the like, yeah, I mean, like these are kind of core experience elements, as you have these like godlike entities.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it's interesting because you could imagine it being like taking place on another planet. Like maybe you come from a planet who does not have gods, and like now you show up on this planet, and like you're actually, a fairly advanced civilization, but like, so you do have technology, but there's also these gods.
That is incredibly interesting. So the gods are just, alien life forms, basically, that inhabit
that's
a
funny.
planet. Yeah, you're trying to set up a new colony.
Like, yeah, okay, that's interesting. So it's almost like however this happened, there's like 4 creatures on this planet that, and then they're just like these incredibly powerful.
This is interesting because it goes directly into aesthetic, where I feel like that's a great pivot if we want that like space aesthetic, which is an aesthetic I totally love. I feel like it detracts a little bit from the kind of mystique of like actual gods. I like the aesthetic of like early human times where, people didn't fully understand, science didn't exist, and people just assumed gods were controlling everything. And I feel like that's kind of the aesthetic that I've been imagining this whole time. But I really like the space colony type of thing.
I think we could do this at almost any time.
Yeah.
Like you could do it as another planet. We could be in modern times and it's literally the moon, and it's like, where it's like, we could do it as, either 1500s and people are colonizing America. Right. And then it could be American gods.
Or it could be in the far future and we've been invaded by 4, tier 3 civilizations or something.
Actually, I love that idea. That is very interesting, but that's for game 2 because you need to defend your existing, it's like...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it'd be weird to like be starting a new colony in the far future. But who knows? Maybe they blew it all up.
Well, I guess my point is, if the gods invade Earth, then you already have this civilization that you need to defend, which I guess is kind of like Pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. This could be our legacy game, where like you play game 1, and then the output civilization of game 1 gets fed directly into game 2, where you're invaded by 3 tier 3 Kardashev civilizations who just
Well, this is hilarious because then are the gods like presumably the gods are still there and from game one, and like how are they like?
Yeah, are they fighting with
maybe they get on the side, like they're not amoral anymore. They're like they don't like any of the other people, but they're like anti the other gods.
Yeah,
I mean,
so could a K3 civilization vanquish a god? I mean, maybe they could. I don't know.
I think that they're well matched.
Right.
Like I think that's what's interesting about it is like a K3 civilization capabilities are at least as, I mean, like the whole thing is definitely more powerful than a god, but it's like, you know, if you just have one outpost or one kind of like, I don't know, scout, maybe that's like equal to the power of a god.
Yeah, just a single individual from this hyper advanced civilization.
I think we could do it like someone, you know, Europe has our like Columbus, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I kind of like, I feel like that's a mix where you're landing in a new place and you make, maybe there are gods here that you didn't have back in the old world.
Oh, interesting.
And then, you know, it's a negotiation.
I feel like Columbus is like
he's canceled.
Yeah, he's canceled. So I don't know.
No, and it doesn't need to be like, I'm saying it can be like Columbus-esque.
Right, like you're landing on some
which even colonialism itself is also kind of
right.
canceled too. So
well, we could do like, you know, you're just a ancient like Native American civilization, you know, maybe you're the Inca or something, and you've just landed, I don't know, in Peru. I don't know where the Incans originally came from, but
I kind of like that there would be some civilization that we would need to recreate. You know what I mean? Like my problem with the Incans is like, and I don't know what they're, and I don't want to, and this is like colonialistically dismissive of their technology because I'm sure they had good stuff, but
although they didn't have wheels.
I guess, yeah, that was one weird thing. But they had toys that had wheels on them, which so it confused everyone.
Well, the surrounding area was so mountainous. Like, why would you need a wheel? You need like a mule that can traverse these mountains.
Yeah. I guess that's
slight tangent here.
What I would say is like I want a civilization that has the ability to like smelt. Maybe you could have like a Bronze Age civilization, which like can smelt ore. But like, they are aware of these things. So maybe it could be like Greek.
Oh, Greek. Yeah.
Okay. I feel like that is the right level of technology.
We could do like ancient Egypt or something. I mean, they had like tons of gods. I feel like their technology was, you know, I mean, for the time it was insanely advanced.
So maybe it could be. I like Egypt because that again, these are almost, you know, these are stories and aesthetics, I guess. Yeah. I like Egyptian. Like these are the people arriving from wherever they were before. You come to Egypt.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was gonna say. Is like I can't think of a single civilization that comes close to Egypt in terms of like constructing things for gods and like having all these gods and all these just insanely elaborate temples that are just mind blowing and are also like 4,000 years old. I mean, it's just I don't know. I've always been a huge fan of like ancient Egypt aesthetic. Yeah, no, I think we should definitely entertain it as an option.
Okay, I know we did not explicitly move to aesthetic ideas, but as discussed, I think some of these stories kind of imply an aesthetic.
Yeah,
so
I think story and aesthetic, at least to me, are so tied together that you can't really discuss one without the other.
I think we have a lot of stuff here. So our options, we've talked about making just like a pure video game, but it sounds like we did not want to do that. Board game was the one that we were kind of already toying with. I thought the idea of like a collaborative based text-based game sounded really interesting.
That was very interesting.
But it just maybe feels like too different.
I would want to basically pivot the whole thing. Like, kind of come up with, you know, all new mechanics. I mean, I don't know if we could find a way to make some of these ideas work with a collaborative text-based game, but some of the ideas that we were talking about felt like we're getting into like different game territory. You know.
So then it sounds like we're sticking with a board game, but we might try to make a digital representation of it first. And then the mechanics are you pick a particular role at the start of the game, which, confers benefits upon you. You can pray and you can build things.
Mm-hmm. Do festivals.
You can hold festivals, make art somehow. And, right, of course. And then this is the thing. It's like the DM. Like, I think, I don't know. I think we should go run with that.
Let's run with it. I like it. It's super interesting.
And then the prayer mechanic is literally like when a player prays, they convey what they want to happen.
Yeah, the more clever conveying of the prayer is rewarded by the DM.
Well, right, exactly. So yeah, I think those are really, I think these are cool first ideas.
Totally.
And then yeah, so Egyptian in terms of story and aesthetic.
We've made a bunch of decisions today. I'm loving it. Let's just run with it.
Okay, well, next chapter, we will be able to validate, are these good ideas?
Right.
We don't know.
We'll start iterating on them.
Yes, iteration. All right. Well, I will see you there, John.
See you next time, Matt.
All right, bye.